There are things I want you to pay attention to. Not because I tell you to, but because they are important in seeing the context of a situation. For example, I'm going to give examples. So during the example, you'll understand why I'm telling you to pay attention to these things. Let's say you have someone that's 22 that ghosts you. She just disappears, vanishes, no explanation. I already made a video about ghosting, so you know that this is a cowardly act. But then people tell you, well, she had a rough childhood, she still has things she needs to process, that's why she often just walks away. And you think about it, and you think, okay, that may be true. But let's say now you have another individual that ghosts you, and she's in her 40s. Are you still going to fall for that explanation that she just needs to process things, and that's why she prefers to just walk away? No, likely not. Because someone in their early 20s are still getting used to adult life, and they are in the process of processing things of their youth. Someone in their 40s had over 2 decades to process things that happened to them while they were younger. Of course, there are grievous crimes that are done to children that will affect them for life, like sexual abuse. We know that. But even then, you had time to face what happened to you and to look for help. So from someone in their 40s, we are less tolerant to take their dysfunctional and defective behaviors. Someone that's a teen, well, they're just teenagers. That's not an excuse, but they're just teenagers. They just came out of childhood and now they're developing into adults. But from someone in their 40s, we wouldn't take much. Why? Because of the context. Now, let me give another example. Let's say you have a 1-year-old and she throws a tantrum. And let's say someone takes offense at it. Everyone would look at the guy and say, hold on, this is a 1-year-old girl. This is a baby. A baby can't do anything for itself. Yet you are upset with a little baby? You take offense at a little baby, you can't stand a baby? Now you have a negative will against a baby? Are you in your right mind? People wouldn't take that if you develop a negative will against a baby. Let's say now that the same baby is now 23 years old, so it's not a baby anymore. It's a grown woman, and she now throws off a tantrum. Now, besides that she's older, she has more body mass, so her body is heavier. So she has physical strength in her bodies. She also has an intellect. She can think, she can choose, and she can decide, she has the ability to decide to flee from danger. This is something she couldn't do when she was 1 year old. She can flee from danger and she can choose to do what's best for herself and for those around her. If she refuses to do what's best for her and those around her, she is enabling danger. She's being narcissistic. So if then someone takes offense at it, we would say, you're correct. You shouldn't behave like this. She should look for help if she has to process something. Even if she has to process something, there's not an excuse for her to behave this way. Or if she was triggered, or if she's falling apart and she really needs help and she really can't help it, that means that we need to help her out and she must comply with the help for both her well-being as well as the well-being of the community. So there's a difference in context here between the 1-year-old and the 23-year-old. So we know that context matters. What I want you to pay attention to are the details concerning someone's story. If you have someone that tells you that they don't have many friends, because people always tend to do them dirty eventually. Pay attention to what they said. They decreed and declared that everyone will do them dirty eventually. Who in their right mind does that to themselves, decreeing negative consequences upon themselves? Nobody in their right mind does that. So that's a big red flag. And then you look at their behavior. They say that they are often victimized and done dirty. But then you look at how they treat others. When others say something or they're moving in a way that is not in line with their expectations, they just ghost someone. They just block someone. They just walk away. And if needed, according to them, they'll even defend themselves by making plain to the other that they're not interested and they don't want to see them anymore. So then you're going to say, hold on a minute. You just told me that people often do you dirty and that's why I don't have many friends. But now I see you doing others dirty and you have no legitimate reason to do so. When you confront them, suddenly they are perplexed. They come up with their reasons, or they tell you to shut up, it's none of your business, so they are avoiding the issue. What happened here? You checked the details of what they were telling you. Not because the details were so important, because the details reveal things about the context. Let me give another example. You have a man meeting a woman on a date. The woman is 21. You may say, okay, what's wrong with this? You have two consenting adults meeting with one another, and they are from the opposite sex. Okay, but the 21-year-old is married, but she did not inform the guy she's married. So now it's a different context. Now it's a context of cheating, in which the other guy is being involved in without them being aware of it. Do you see how context matters? So, when someone is telling you something, don't lose yourself in the details, but pay attention to the details they're giving you. Pay attention to what they're saying to you, but also what they're not saying. When someone has something to hide, there will always be things that they will emphasize. Why do they emphasize those things? So your attention will be on those things, so that you won't notice the other things that you would have noticed if you examined what they were saying. So if a perpetrator, or better said a narcissist, is playing the victim, they may emphasize a lot what was done onto them and how it affected them, how hurt they were, and how it affected their lives. Those details may be true. Okay, they may not be lying about that. But why don't they tell you how they handled it? Why don't they tell you how they reflected back on what happened to them and how they changed, how they dealt with it? Or if they tell you, for example, that let's say you have a guy telling you that his ex-wife was controlling, whether it's factual or not doesn't matter. If he keeps emphasizing that she was controlling, that means he wants you to focus on that. He wants you to take his report for true and to not ask any questions. Because the moment you begin to ask more questions about how was she controlling and all of that, now he either doesn't have an answer or he will just emphasize something else to distract you. Why? Because in this case he is hiding something, namely that he was having an affair. So now he's highlighting some dysfunctions she had to use that as an excuse for why his marriage failed. There's nothing wrong with someone emphasizing something, okay? Just because someone emphasizes something doesn't mean they're hiding something, okay? Just remember that. The question is, why are they emphasizing something? Are they emphasizing it because they think it's something quite important that people need to pay attention to for a practical reason? Or are they highlighting something because they want to divert your attention away from something else? So context matters. That's why it's important to ask yourself constructive questions concerning every situation you encounter. Every situation you encounter, You must deal with it by asking constructive questions about the situation. Don't ask yourself, why does this happen to me? Or what's wrong with him? Or what's wrong with her? Or why does this and that? No, don't ask such depressing, angry questions. Ask constructive questions. So if you have a man that never wants to invest in social relationships, ask yourself, how come that he doesn't want to invest in social relationships? How come that he survived in life by being so dysfunctional towards other people? Ask constructive questions. When you ask constructive questions to yourself, you will see the context quickly. If you ask self-centered questions as, what's wrong with this guy? Doesn't he have any manners? Or why does he act like that? Or when you ask questions when you ask questions out of complaint, you'll keep yourself in a cycle of negativity, which will lead to bitterness. No, ask constructive questions. That's what you ought to do. When you ask constructive questions, you'll notice very quickly when someone is hiding something from you. So always pay attention to the details. Not so that you will lose yourself in the details, because you should always keep the bigger picture in mind, but the details are also significant. Because details can hint you whether someone is lying to you, or whether someone is deceived, or whether someone tries to scam you. Don't just follow feelings. Check the context. Ask yourself constructive questions about every situation you encounter. Constructive questions. So questions that are based, questions that aim to solutions that work out both for you and for others. So questions that lead to, questions that are focused on finding solutions for the long-term well-being of both you and those around you. Such questions you need to ask yourself concerning every situation you encounter. When you do this, very quickly will you notice deception. Think about what I said about people cutting you off. One does it in the early 20s, the other in the 40s. The one in the 20s, it doesn't have to be the case, but it can be that they're just defective because they haven't processed things yet. That still doesn't justify what they did, but you can understand it. But someone in their 40s that does it because they have a vested interest in that dysfunction, in that defect. Namely, they don't want to face themselves and they just want to use the victim mentality to exploit others. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have people in the early 20s that do this, using a victim mentality to exploit others. Nevertheless, the context reveals whether something is likely or not. So always check the context. And above checking the context, remain in prayer and sensitive to the Holy Spirit. That's it for now. Keep agreeing with Christ and be at peace.